Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one we're going to return to London and revisit this brewery for the second time. And it's my first English beer review in quite a while actually now that I think about it. But for this one we are going to go to the Weird Beard Brewing Company and have a taste of their Fade to Black, which is a black IPA. So in honour of the Metallica reference for this beer, may your wonderful devil horns stroke your luscious and glorious chin here. So anyway, as is usual with my beer reviews then, I'll take you through a very brief history of the company. It will only be a minute or two because it's a very new brewery, not so much information available, but if you do want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. The brewery website's in the description for you below, along with a link to my other reviews that I've done from these guys before, and I can guarantee you that I will add to it in the fairly near future because these guys are a really top-notch brewery. So anyway, this brewery is from West London and it was started by two award-winning homebrewers, and that was Greg and Brian, and they won quite a few awards before deciding to start up their own brewery and turn professional, if you like, as many people in the craft beer business do. But the guys say that their beer are inspired by the American and the British craft beer movements, and they go out and actively promote their beers in different places. If you keep an eye on their website and on their Facebook pages, they do various tasting sessions, and recently they actually did a tap takeover as well at Brewdog, and they do quite a few of these. I think the Weird Beer Brewing Company and Brewdog seem to have a very, very good relationship, and I think Brewdog actually helped these guys out with their distribution as well, although I may be wrong with that. But the rule with it being Weird Beer Brewing Company, of course, is that everyone involved with the brewery apparently sports some kind of form of impressive facial hair. So do have a look at the website and you will see the guys there. They've all got the big biker beards and stuff, which makes mine look very girly in comparison to that, of course. But anyway, very, very good brewery, very hop forward, just to kind of sum it up for you there. And these guys really are going places. I believe they were only established a few years ago. I think maybe 2012 was when they were established, but these guys will go on to great things, and the beer that they're producing already really is excellent. So make sure you check out the Weird Beard Brewing Company. Just to list a few of the other beers that you can get from these guys, there's the Mariana Trench, which is a Pacific Pale Ale, Black Pearl, which is a coffee milk stout, 5 O'Clock Shadow, aptly named of course, which is an American IPA, Fade to Black, which is this guy here, a black IPA, Decadent Stout, which I'm sure you can guess the style of, Hit the Lights, which is an IPA, and Kentish Town Beard, which was a collaboration beer for Brewdog Bar in Camden. And these guys are all in their core range, and they do also have the Shark Bait Australian IPA, which was the one I reviewed for you before, which incidentally was a beautiful, beautiful beer. So be sure to check out some of those if you can. They've all got excellent ratings on Rate Beer and BeerAdvocate.com if you care to check it out. So anyway, without further ado, let's actually get on to the tasting of this beer. I'll just bring up the camera and let you have a little look at the artwork on this guy, because the Weird Beer Brewing Company do some really quite cool and sort of quite classic style artwork, if you like. You can see the kind of hop leaves on the vines there, the hop cones I should say rather, and it is really nicely done. You can see the skull that is the typical sort of typical marker, if you like, of the Weird Beer Brewing Company there, and you can see he's also sporting a very nice piece of facial hair and a Mohican, and you can see the bottle cap there. I think the bottle caps for each of these beers are different, so you might want to collect them if you're into that. Just to read what it says actually about the beer on the side, it says about the beer, Black India Pale Ale, sounds wrong but tastes so right, an innovative style which challenges your preconceptions about how a dark beer should taste. Fade to Black is darker than a Metallica album cover and hoppier than a frog that has just been dropped in a keg, has just had a keg dropped on his foot. This beer has a fascinating interplay between fruity hops and dark roasted notes from the malt and spicy rye. Drink with a char-grilled steak. So there's your food pairing. This guy, to tell you about the actual specs of this beer, it is a 6.5% black IPA. It's hopped with Summit, Soriachi Ace and Citra hops, and it has a malt base of pale crystal rye, chocolate, and also Carafa number 3. So it should be a very interesting beer for us to try. Without further ado, let's get on with the tasting of this guy. So we'll open it up and see how we go. As you can see, a nice kind of smoky opening as we get it out there. Looks really nice actually. It looks very much like a porter, but it's a very different style of beer. I tried my first black IPA for you just a few videos ago, and that was very, very nice. It was really unusual actually just to have the kind of hoppy fruity flavours there, and you can really smell that as you pour this. You get a nice dark malt and also some really nice kind of fruity notes coming off of it there. So as you can see, this guy is poured with a really quite magnificent head on it. It's about 3 fingers, and it's a very kind of very frothy head, I have to say, on that. Not even any bumps in it, but 3 fingers, definitely a kind of beige head. As you can see, the beer has poured a really dark rosewood colour, I'd say is maybe the best way to describe it. If I hold it up to the light, you can see there's just a really dark ruby tinge, but maybe ebony is a good way to describe the colour of this beer, and as a matter of fact, but it looks absolutely beautiful. You can see just a teeny little bit of sediment in the bottom of the glass here, when there was quite a bit of sediment on the bottle before I poured it. You can see just a teeny bit of carbonation sticking to the glass, but there is a little bit just moving up towards the bottom of the head there, but it looks really nice. As I'm sure you can tell, it's not transparent in the slightest if I put my fingers behind it, but that is exactly what you would expect from a black IPA. So without further ado, let's have a little look at the aroma with this guy. So if you just take in the smell, just without sugaring it about too much, the first thing that comes out is you'd really notice the mix between a sort of porter, if you like, and a black IPA. So it's a very interesting beer. If this is your first taste of the style, just this one's actually demonstrates the aroma quite perfectly, I think. So you've got a nice roasted malt underneath, you've got a bit of kind of dark coffee in there, a bit of chocolate, but you can also pick up a bit more of the kind of sweeter caramel aromas coming out of it. Maybe you can pick out a little bit of the kind of treacle in it as well, or molasses as the Americans would call it, just for those of you watching across the sea, of course. But yeah, it's got a little bit of a kind of woody note to it as well. But if you sugar it up a little bit more, when it's stationary, by the way, you can just pick up a little bit of the sharper element from the hops, which is quite interesting. But when you sugar it up a little bit more, that's really when you start to get the more hoppy aromas out of it. So when you sugar it up, you start to get the kind of citrusy hops out of it. You can definitely pick up the grapefruit in this one. You can pick up that typically sour note that you get from the grapefruit, which is, I think, from the Summit hop, but it could be from the Soriachi Ace. I'm not too sure about the actual the 2 makeups of those hops. I know the Citra hop very well, but Soriachi Ace and Summit are ones that are less commonly used than Citra, of course. But yeah, you can really pick up a nice little bit of kind of pine resin in there, that kind of sharp, slightly dusty aroma. But there's a nice citrusy characteristic to it, and you can pick up that definite grapefruit kind of sour element to it. And there is a kind of aromatic and grassy presence about this beer also. So you can pick up all the elements you would expect both from an IPA and from something more along the lines of a porter. So a nice dark, basically a nice porter aroma when it's stationary with just a little bit of an IPA tinge to it, but when you sugar it up, you start to get all the hoppy aromas out of it. So be sure, if you're trying the black IPA style for the first time, be sure that you take a good bit of time and just get around the smell of this. So let's crack into this guy now. This is the Fade to Black from Weir Beard Brewing Company in West London. Slàinte. Yeah. So, on first impression, it's quite a dark, slightly roasted and very smoky beer actually. It's more leaning towards the porter side. But we'll see how we progress with a few more sips. Yeah, as I was expecting, when you take the first sip in, it comes across as more of a porter. But then as you take the second sip and your mouth's adjusted to it a little bit, that's when you start to get more of the hop flavours out. So you can really pick up more along the porter lines in this beer, and then you get the nice little hoppy elements after it as well. So very, very nice. Yeah, the hops really do become more present in this one as you take a few more sips in and let your mouth adjust to it. So very nicely done actually. Yeah. So there's a really nice malt underlying of this one. It's quite dark and roasted in the malt base. There's a nice little bit of caramel sweetness, but it's very mild. It's more of a dark, very roasted character that you're getting from the malt base in this one. A little bit of cereal in there, I would say, too, and there's quite a bit of chocolate character. From the taste of it, it's actually quite surprising that there's not Fuggles hops in this, because the Fuggle hop would actually make this kind of slightly smoky character. It's a very dark roasted coffee element that comes out just on the back edges of the tongue. That's a characteristic I've encountered with the Fuggles hop before, but obviously Fuggles aren't in this one. But yeah, on the middle of the tongue, it kind of comes in. It's more, the beer, when you have the liquid in your mouth, is more fruity, I would say. But you have this malt base in the middle, and the malt base kind of pushes its way out a little bit more. The dark coffee bitterness pushes its way out a little bit more as you move into the aftertaste. So you've got this coffee roasted character on the back edges of the tongue, and in the middle of the tongue slightly as well. But you've got a nice blanket of a kind of dark, kind of chocolatey flavour just across the middle of the tongue, but some kind of really dark bitter coffee in there too. A little bit of cereal, I would point out, is in there too, and perhaps that's kind of giving the impression of a little bit more sort of ashy or smoky character. But there's a really nice malt blanket on this one, but as the beer is just in your mouth, you get the nice juicy hoppiness around the edge of the tongue too, and it's really only in the aftertaste that the sort of porter side of the beer kind of comes out, if that makes sense, the very dark side of the beer. And you can see actually, when I say that, I've just thought about that. Obviously that's why they call it fade to black, because the darker flavours come in the aftertaste, so very good actually. But yeah, around the edges of the tongue, just as you build into the aftertaste, of course, that's where you're getting the really nice hoppy flavours in there. So you've got some nice slightly piney resins. The pine resins in this one are quite mild, but they do come in at the sort of midpoint of the tongue, just kind of either side of the sort of U bend at the front of the tongue actually. Very nicely done. Some piney resins in there, but you get some nice slightly grapefruit flavours, I think, that come in, particularly at the front of the tongue. Just that little bit of grapefruit sourness in there, but there's a definite citrusy and aromatic presence to this beer as well. Yeah, you get a nice sort of citrusy element around the back of the tongue here. You get a really nice juicy citrusy element at the back, but it also spreads to the front, and I think the grapefruit flavours are kind of coming out just on the front of the tongue there. This beer has a hell of a lot going on it, so just take a little bit of time when you're tasting this and try and pick out all the different flavours that are available here. Yeah, you get just this very kind of mild grapefruity flavour that builds in this little oily bubble on the front of the tongue, and you get a little bit of grassy character, and that aromatic-y kind of piney resin flavour is just around the corner, the sort of curved edges of the tongue, just as you get into the straight part. And you've got a nice kind of caramelly, not caramelly, aromatic-y and citrusy element just kind of pushes its way in there with the pine resins, and it's a little bit juicy on the back of the tongue. There is perhaps a teeny little bit of earthy character, but very mild. It's more a fruity hop character, so you've got this nice porter beer, essentially a nice porter beer base, but the hop character of the beer really is very fruity. Nice little bit of grapefruit, nice bit of citrus, a little bit of pine resin in there too, but some floral and aromatic and kind of grassy elements around the front. The front part of the tongue really is quite a smooth hoppy part. You've got a nice juicy, grassy and slightly citrusy, very little bit of grapefruit in there, just particularly on the front end of the tongue with that little oily bubble. But you can see exactly what the point of the black IPA is, and as I say, the name is very apt, because in terms of the flavour, the roasted characters from the dark side of the beer really push their way to prominence as you get into the aftertaste of the beer. But you do get a nice, I think it's a particularly grassy, lingering hop character in the aftertaste of this one. It's beautifully done. This is a very good one to get into the black IPA style, I would say, because it's very easy to see what this style is supposed to be. So if you've never heard of the style, this is probably a very good place to start. Yeah, there's a definite grapefruit presence and that little oily bubble on the front of the tongue. But in terms of the mouthfeel of this guy, I'd say quite mid-bodied, I would say. The roasted character in this beer gives it a bit more of a mid-bodied kind of feel. The carbonation on it is fairly low. The malt base is quite mild until you actually go into the aftertaste, and then you get a nice lingering coffee bitterness to it. But there's a big kind of hoppy presence in this one, and it's actually quite juicy. So you get a big change in mouthfeel with this guy. It goes from being quite juicy, hoppy juicy with nice fruits and grass and some pine resin. Even the pine resin in this is quite a moist mouthfeel, but then it goes to being quite a dry, bitter coffee beer. So the mouthfeel on this is very interesting, and it is particularly dry in the aftertaste, but it's very nice and juicy as you have the liquid in your mouth. So I mean, overall I would say there's some really awesome flavours in this beer, and it really demonstrates the whole idea behind a black IPA. You've got a nice juicy hoppy bitterness in there, but you've got a nice roasted, almost porterish malt base in this one. So it's a really, really cool beer that will very much test your palate. And from what I see, as I say, I'm not very experienced in the black IPA style, but I would think that this is a very good one to start off with if you've never tried the style before, because it demonstrates the two key parts of this beer and blends them together very, very well. And overall, I would say that this is more of a tasting beer. It's more of a beer to test your palate and enjoy with a nice kind of as a nice dessert beer with a bit of chocolate cake, or even, as they say, with a steak was the way that they paired it on here. But it's a beautiful, beautiful beer, and definitely worth trying, as are all of the beers from Weir Beer Brewing Company. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this beer review. It's been really cool to return to Weir Beer Brewing Company. Remember to stroke your glorious chin fluff with the devil horns for the Metallica reference to this beer. But I hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments section your own thoughts on this beer, as always, and please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff, and I hope I will catch you soon with another beer review. Cheers!